Welcome everyone in class, welcome everyone online to day 2 of this masterclass. And today we're going to be focusing on animation and the kind of workflows that we went through to create a lot of the kind of visual effects for Jonah. And we're going to kind of start the day off with Previsualization. And this is kind of a huge area for us in the way that we work and the way we kind of plan projects and plan films. Commonly used in lots of different industries, from architectural visualization to full-length feature films, and it's kind of really important to try and use Previsualization as a not just a kind of a tool to get it roughly right, but to try and be as accurate as possible with what you're doing and what you're trying to plan with camera moves, motion, characters, everything like that. And I'm going to kind of start us off with a short video, which explains it shows the kind of previs versus the final result in many of the shots of the final film. So there's no sound here, and it's not, every shot isn't kind of like shot for shot. But you'll get a really great idea of kind of how we planned the previs and then what that kind of translated to in the final film. And this isn't the entire film, but it's just kind of extracts from the film. So this is a moment when our old man, kind of like our young man rather, materializes into the old man, so it's kind of a 50-year transition through his eye as the town's transforming. And there's a scene at the bus stop which we kind of created, and this previs was created after we'd done a kind of week-long recce in Zanzibar. So we had a really strong idea of the location that we wanted to shoot in. We took kind of reference photographs that we could kind of build really rough base templates for all the environments, what we could kind of camera project onto certain scenes and kind of quickly rig characters up to do certain movements. And you can see here just how, in some of the shots particularly, how similar they are to the final film. And we downloaded a rigged fish from TurboSquid, and we had some fun with that. And we linked kind of lots of mocap data to the fish and also to the kind of base characters that we were working with. And I'm going to be showing you how to kind of add mocap data to a basically rigged character, and how to blend different mocap data together on layers, and even add custom animation on top of the mocap data very, very easily. So this is where our character's kind of like contemplating setting out to sea to find the fish, and then he sees a splash in the water. And some of it was actually, some of the previs was actually filmed from the characters themselves in kind of like early kind of like tests and character tests. And here we see our kind of character setting out to sea in the previs with our rubbish, and the boat's kind of intersecting the water. And we did lots of different kind of versions of this. So we're not really caring too much about any kind of accuracy or consistency in visually, but we're trying to think mainly about camera and how it's working with this kind of story of the scene. So here we're kind of like seeing the fish for the first time underwater. And there was a huge kind of fight scene with the fish, which we did lots of kind of iterations for on how that was going to work, and the interaction between our main character on the boat and our fish. Some of which got drastically changed because there was quite a few limitations to what we could achieve on site. Our actor wasn't particularly comfortable on the water, which didn't help. So we had to film our main old man always on the sand, and then we were kind of looking up at him from a kind of dugout trench in the sand. And then whenever we see an old man on the boat, it's always a body double from one of the local guys out there. So we were kind of limited to what we could achieve on set. And obviously we did the previs of the fish, but Jellyfish Pictures did all of the realization of the fish. So it was good for Jellyfish to be able to see straight away our intention with the previs, and also with all of the artwork, the visual ambition for it as well. So this previs was kind of created while we were doing the artwork. And it got tweaked, and we even created a whole new version once the script got changed quite drastically, kind of halfway through. There's a little bit of sound on here. And this is our big moment, when the fish kind of crashes through the water and our character kind of flies back down into the water. So that gives you a great idea of how previs works and how we kind of used it to our advantage for the film, and how because we're a small production, we needed all the help we could get to make this film a reality, and the more we could do up front, the more of a chance the film had of being successful. So we'll go through Previsualization. We'll open up a few scenes that we created and have a little look at motion capture and how we can link that to our bipeds using the motion graph. In particular, I think we've got a few scenes like this market scene here and how that translated into one of the final shots. Then we'll be looking at tracking. Within P-FTrack, we're going to be looking at tracking this kind of dynamic street scene, which has lots of problems because it has kind of moving characters, and it's not just your kind of standard setup of kind of a simple track. We're looking at loads of different animated elements within this street scene, and we're going to be focusing heavily on this actual scene from kind of start to completion, really, including slice rotation techniques, constraints, and manual keyframing. We're going to be looking at Vray and the kind of practical uses of that, where we've used it, and the limitations, and how we've used it in different projects before in the past. We're going to be looking at kind of a particle flow technique and examining how that was kind of broken down. We're looking briefly at thinking particles, and how we can kind of create kind of like objects appearing from nowhere or transforming, and how that was used in the Golden Age film. And then we'll be having a little play around with mass effects and different ways that we've used that, from simple dropping of objects to baking in kind of reacting collision objects. And then, yeah, that's day 3. So let's get going. So the first thing we're going to be looking at is the previs. And we're going to open up the we're going to be opening up a simple kind of character and how we might rig that. Or how rather we might add kind of motion cap data to an already rigged character that you can download from the internet. Because again, we could probably rig a character, but there's no point there, when there's so many resources for kind of buying these things on the internet. Let's have a look what we have here. Uh-oh. Okay, so we have a biped. Let's increase the frame range 1,000. So this is a simple rigged biped. And I'm going to introduce you to those of you who haven't used bipeds before. They're essentially a collection of bones that are kind of linked together in different ways. And essentially, all we're going to do is click on, well, normally we kind of select the bone objects. We can see our character here. This little tool is quite useful in version, so we can kind of like see our bones and then we can see our character with a click of a button. We use that quite a lot. Because often when we're working in mocap, we want to kind of do all the animation with the bones, and then at the last minute when we're kind of capturing the previs, we want to invert that to kind of show the full character. So if we click on one of the bones here, and we introduce you to the kind of the motion panel. So as soon as we open that, we have lots of different options to kind of like control and animate our character. Now what we need to do to add mocap data is go to activate the mixer mode, and then open up the mixer graph. So then we're kind of presented with another kind of timeline here. And one of the first things we want to do is right-click within our main window here and add a transition track below. And then all we really want to do is import one of our clips. And we've got a library of kind of different mocap data that we use for different things. You can there's lots of different outlets where you can kind of buy mocap data, some of which are free, some of which you have to buy. So we can kind of like add any of these. It gives you kind of small previews, but they're not particularly very good. You can kind of like see which, in this little window bar higher, you can kind of scroll and see what the rough animation is, but they're not really a very good one. But you can kind of see that this one's kind of like fooling around or dancing around. So we'll take him, dynamic 1. And it'll just kind of warn you about your frame ranges and your frame rates, but you just normally press OK to this. And then we can see we have our thing linked here. It's red for some reason. Let's just have a little look what we have. It gave us a little warning. Let's just double check what that warning was. Let's import another one. So it's warning us that it's an obsolete data. That's fine, because it's probably created from an older version of Max, and we're using 2014 here. So if we drag this down, we can see that we now have this on our biped. We can just minimize this, and we can see that our biped is now animating quite simply with our mocap data that we've kind of added to it. So very easily we've just kind of linked that, and this is obviously going to be, if we invert our selection, we can see that it's actually happening. Let's leave this light. It's all linked with our main character, but obviously we don't want to really work in this mode because we can't see the movement very well. This is where we'll actually start to export the viewport. Drag this back over. We'll actually start to grab our viewport to see this properly, but for now we don't really need to do this. We're not finished with our data set yet. So we can work much faster by working with the bones here and see what the movement's actually doing. This is quite a long mocap set. So what else can we do here? If we go back into our motion panel, you have to click on one of our bones to see anything. Go back into our mixer, which is here. Let's just zoom out of this for a second. So what happens if we add a new track to this? We want to dance around for a second, and then we want to run off in a certain direction, say. So let's find another mocap set. Let's see what we should add here. Let's add a jog. And see what's happened automatically is, if we just stretch this in, automatically it's created a kind of link between these two files. When we move this, we can see that that link is editing as well. And what this is a blend between the two sets of mocap. It's automatically clipping our first set when we move our second jog motion we've added here. So let's see what happens when we kind of go to around about this timeline here, where the jog kicks in. Let's see what's happening to the actual biped. Again, it's quite a long frame set, so you can see here our timeline's kicking in here. And then we're seeing that he's stumbling around, and then he starts jogging. Let's increase our timeline. You can see here that transition, he starts jogging there. And this has actually worked quite well. Normally it doesn't kind of blend quite as successfully as this, and normally to solve that, what you have to do is, within our kind of blend kind of clip here, we can edit all different kinds of parameters on how that blends, but we could also quite simply press optimize, and it searches the entire clip for the best transition moment between where the feet are between those different mocap data sets. See, now our timeline has changed, and it's edited our two pieces of footage to say that this point here, this exact point here, is the best place for feet-wise for that to change. And we can argue with that if we want, and we can kind of try and change it manually. But this is where the computer is automatically saying, this is the best thing, this is the best place I think that this guy should start running from. I'd say we're happy with that, but we want him to kind of run in a different direction. We don't want him to run off in that direction. We want him to run off in a slightly different direction. This is where our edit panel comes in. We can edit this, and we can manually change our rotation. So now he should run off in a different direction there. So we've got quite a lot of control, even though we're using kind of preset motion information. We've actually got quite a lot of control on how that actually reacts. So we don't have to animate everything. We can just kind of control certain parameters for him to do what we want him to do. And then we can do that for anything. We can do that for walking, standing still. We can have a walking motion and then control him to stand still and blend that with a kind of more of a standing still talking motion. We can do like literally anything. And we use this technique a lot for controlling the animation within Jonah, or the previs within Jonah. You can kind of see where the two bipeds kind of collide there, the two sets of motions. Well, we can go further than this. We can actually add layers to this animation. So say we're happy with this. We're happy with what our motion's doing here. Then what we have to do is, this is quite unobvious, but we have to kind of right-click our kind of main title of our biped up here. And then we have to go to Compute Mixdown. And what that's going to do is kind of load the two sets of mocap datas and also the blend between them. And it's going to create one data set which combines all two. And then we have to right-click on that Compute Mixdown, and then we have to go to Copy to Biped. And that's going to add keyframes to our biped. So now if we click on any of the bones, let's just have a look again. Copy to biped. It's quite a lot of frames, and we probably should have tested this with a smaller object, but we'll see what this does when it's thinking about it. Go to our motion control. We go out of mixer mode. We can see that we've copied all those keyframes to our biped there. But then the great thing about the motion panel is that we can use layers. For those of you who haven't used animation layers before, it's a really great feature. It allows a huge amount of control for your animation. You know, so we kind of like, have a look at this motion here. You know, say we want him, we're doing a camera move from here, say, and we want him to be looking at the camera at this point rather than looking straight forward. We can see that we're working on the original animation layer here. Within layers, we're working on original. We just want to create a new layer, and automatically, when we click on that on our head, we got rid of the original keyframes. We haven't really got rid of them. They're just hidden on a different layer. So now we can actually start animating different parameters of this guy. So he's looking over here. And then he continues on. So, and then over here, you know, he's looking forward. So we want his arm to kind of do something slightly different. We want it to start over here or whatever. And then over here, it kind of becomes normal. So we've got a huge amount of control over our biped and our motion by kind of combining mocap data and manual keyframes. And then we can actually start putting cameras in our scene. We put a camera on, still hide our we'll hide our geometry and hide our bones. Leave cameras on. We'll put a camera in the scene here. Let's go to the top viewport. We'll put our target on our guy. And let's just link our target to his head, say. And now we have our camera always focusing on his head. It's probably not actually focusing on his head. Let's just quickly unlink that and try that again. It might give a slightly erratic movement because he's moving quite fast, but we'll give it a go. Put that near his head. So we can see now that we're always kind of focusing on our character, but we can create quite an interesting camera move. If we just put a ground plane in here so we can see what's going on. Give it a few slightly less garish color. Oops. I've got object display color. If you get stuck in that mode, just put it to material color. Sometimes it's useful to use the object color if you've got a really complex scene and you don't want to have to take in any texture information into your in your viewport. So again, let's hide our geometry. Apart from we have a problem now because obviously we want to see our ground plane, but we don't want to see any of our guy here. So if we select all of our geometry apart from our plane, just hide this for now. Hide selected and hide our bones. Just hidden our bones as well. And hide all for a second. So where we should really have this on layers so we can kind of control this a little bit better when we get into the scene. Let's leave him on for now. Add a few subdivs into our plane so we can see. And then we can see here, if we do a quick screen capture, slightly changed in 2014. Let's have a look. Capture image, create preview animation. So we'll do from 0 to 300, say. Leave it as an AVI. Increase our output slightly. Just sometimes this is dependent on your screen size. This is going expert mode here. Slightly bigger. 25 frames per second. That's the English way. In America, you do that 29.97 or something ridiculous, because they like to be different. So this is actually going to go quite slow because we've got our edge faces selected. We've got our character, which is quite a detailed, high-resolution character. So we might actually want to cancel this. Actually, it's going a little bit too slow. But this is essentially what we'd export. Don't stop. Stop and play. Stop, don't play. This is what we'd want to do when we were finally exporting our scenes. We probably wouldn't have edge faces on, but we'd try and see the motion as kind of exported AVI files, which we could then put into Premiere. But let's just have a little look at this guy. Let's try and hide some of the elements here. Let's organize his clothes onto layers that we can actually turn off. He's quite a detailed guy here. Okay. So we've hidden that and hide the bones. We should be able to scroll through a lot better now. There we go. So now we can see our ground plane. We can see kind of what our how he's kind of reacting to the scene. We can see now we've created quite a realistic, even though it's slightly jarring, it's quite a realistic camera move and camera motion with our biped here by linking our our character to our target path rather to our to an element of our biped. Probably the most static element of our biped is probably his mid ground here. So if we want to do this again, we maybe start linking it to his waist rather than his head, because his head's moving around quite a lot, especially in that original motion. But you can see when he's kind of jogging around, his head's in a slightly funny place because we've animated it. But it's very easy to create a kind of relatively realistic feeling scene with digitally with the motion controllers, mocap data, and by linking your camera to the biped or to anything within the scene which is dynamically moving around. So we can kind of take this a little bit further. We can start actually moving our camera a bit more custom. Let's actually link his target to his mid ground, and let's do that a bit. So get that motion a bit smoother. Let's just isolate these elements. Oops. Unlink that from his head. Link it to the base of his thing. And then let's start animating this camera as well. So again, we're working with a very long time frame. Let's just have a look at that a little bit better and try and trim it down to where he stops, which is about there, 961. And the great thing about this is once we have a scene set up, we can just literally start playing with loads of cameras, seeing what's working, exporting out loads of clips, and then editing it together into something which works. So let's start animating the camera. Let's work in 2 viewports. Let's get into our camera and activate our safe frame. Actually set 16:9 ratio. And then let's turn on our auto key and actually start having some fun with this character. So let's maybe start, we're looking at his kind of mid-ground, that's fine. If we link the, once we've linked that, that target, we don't necessarily have to have it on his waist. We can link it to his waist and then move it to somewhere more preferable, but then it will still take the motion from his waist. So let's go to top viewport. Start off behind him here. He's going to dance around and we're going to kind of follow him manually. We could link the actual camera to the biped as well and you get the whole movement, but sometimes it's nice to control things slightly separately. Just kind of rotate around him here. Quite like to get in front of him. You've got to double check where your camera is moving to between these keyframes. We want to kind of, yeah, nice to zoom out of him as he's looking towards the camera. And see where he starts jogging, and see where we can change this. So he starts jogging over there. So let's say he starts jogging towards the camera at this point. So once you've set your kind of camera path, then you can specifically go into your animation layers and start animating certain elements more particularly, particularly his head, where his kind of focus is, where he's looking at. Any specific movements you want his body or his arms to do, we can see that there. So let's have a look at what this is doing. Before we kind of do anything, let's just have a look in our graph editor at what our camera's doing. Graph editor is going to show the motion of whatever we've got selected. So we can see some points which might not be kind of on a nice curve, so we can manually kind of edit these. And some of you may be kind of familiar with some of the things that I'm showing, some of you may not be, and it's just kind of having a play with all of these different features, which are completely just very normal things within the system that you just might not have used before, and having a play with some of the animation features of them. The graph editor, I'm presuming most of you will be relatively familiar with, editing paths and things like that. So once we're kind of happy, let's have a little playback of this and see what it looks like. And then he starts running with his head the other way. So that's basically how we set up most of the previous files. The only additional thing to do is add our environments, and we did that just by simply adding projected textures onto really rough geometry. What we do here, what we then do is kind of play around with lots of multiple cameras within the scene, not just kind of one camera. We'd never do anything this long, but we might do camera paths this long and then cut it up. Again, it's just getting used to the edit in Premiere. We would get kind of placeholder music very early on, and we'd have a kind of like a structure to kind of cut to. And we'd do multiple camera moves within all of the scenes. But even for all of our normal kind of architectural visualization films, we kind of very quickly previs everything and cut what we think is working to a placeholder soundtrack, which is kind of symbolizing the look and feel of what we want, and then we'll get custom music made once we have that kind of template in place. And it also gives us someone doing the music a really great reference to the kind of pace in the edit, and also the kind of the placeholder music might not be 100% what you want, but you should try and be as accurate as possible to the kind of feel that you want when choosing placeholder music for your films, because it will really inform your sound designer's creation. So let's have a look at a slightly different camera option here. Let's look at attaching things to splines. So let's just kind of put a spline in the scene. I always use NURBS curves for doing camera splines because they have a much better. See what I think we're working on the hidden layer here. So let's just click on this. They have a much better system for controlling curves and in kind of both directions. You don't have to control your handles for your spline in a kind of X and Z motion. You can just control one curve, one point which controls the both directions basically. So it gives you a much smoother result. Let's mess around with this. Let's just first of all attach our camera to our path. So let's kind of delete all these. Actually, let's create a new camera rather than deleting that one. So we have an option. Let's go into perspective mode. Control C gives us our new camera. And let's go to animation constraints, path constraint. And let's just link that to our path. And you can see that it's automatically given me that path, attached it to the path from frame 0 to the end of my time frame, going to the end of the spline. So whatever you've got set in your main time frame here will be the kind of the limitations of your camera along that path. So what we can do is we can, again, this is already linked. Oh no, it's not. It's linked to our thing. So we can already link it to our biped here. So our focus is again on our man. Let's check what that's doing. So now we're kind of focusing on our man and our cameras along the path. Just turn off grids for a second. Better. And then what can we do now? This is on a path. Let's just have a look at what the motion is doing for now. Okay, it's really low down. So we want to edit our spline. And again, working in 2 viewports through our camera view, say frame on. Turn off our grid in here as well. And then let's move this spline around until we're kind of happy with where that path is going. Let's check where he jogs off and try and match that somewhere. So he's jogging off there. Let's get our final frame in place. It's in the middle. Let's kind of do a stupid crane shot that could never happen and go above him. I guess that's the other thing with your cameras. More often than not, we get it's kind of hard to get people to do normal camera moves, realistic camera moves. You know, because you're so used to using the computer to kind of do your cameras, and sometimes it's good to just get out there with some real cameras and see how you would actually film something, and then try and replicate that more digitally. Being more subtle, the kind of good thing and bad thing about digital cameras is that you can literally do anything, but especially when working on full CG scenes, it can it can kind of ruin your illusion of trying to be realistic when you have stupid camera movements, basically. It's much better to kind of be calmer and more photographic with your cameras in 3D if you're after a kind of a realistic look. More often than not, we always try to use real footage within our animations, and then that becomes even more challenging to make your CG look realistic in context with that. So you have to really be careful with what you're doing with the camera. So let's go even higher at this point. kind of Michael Bay film. And let's look what that's doing. Let's turn on our grid so we can see what the floor's doing. It's important to see what the groundscape is doing with these things. So if we were to do this, not that we need to do this more detailed in Previs really, but if we wanted to smooth that motion out, we could go back into our motion graph and try and blend those two pieces of footage together a little bit more successfully. But again, it's a priority thing. I think the more important thing is the general movement and the camera work in these kind of scenes. So let's have a look at this path constraint and what we can do with this. We do this a lot. We have path constraints or camera constraints along paths, and then you really want to control this motion. And you know, if you wanted to kind of go fast here and slow here, fast here and slow here, you know, just like the Xavier film that we kind of showed yesterday, there was the long camera move at the end, and the animation of that camera had to slow down drastically in certain areas. Very, very fine movements had to be kind of achieved, because we were talking about that model was all kind of real scale, so it was kind of, you know, thousands of miles and kilometers away from each other. So it was pinpoint accuracy of animation of this camera along the path. Let's just have a look what we can do here. So if we go to our motion control again, see we've got our path constraint here. Just have a look at what we can do. Within our assigned controller, you can see that we've got different kind of parameters: position, roll angle, scale. But within our actual main window here, we've got path options and percentage along the path. So we can see that actually changes when we kind of move across 21. You know, this is going to be 100. This is going to be 0. But what if you don't want this to be 50? What if you want the beginning bit to be very fast and then it to slow down? So your first option or your first thought would be, I'm going to animate this number, right? So you turn on auto key on 0. Let's say I'm going to avoid, not that you have to, but I'm going to avoid these keyframes here. You could just work on another animation layer for your path constraint. That's fine, but for the sake of this, I'll just work within this. So here, I'm going to set this to 30. I want this to go faster at the beginning. Here, it's 58. I want to change this to 70. So I'm essentially speeding up everything in the first half, and I'm slowing down everything in the second half, right? Let's have a look at what that's doing in the graph editor. So let's click our percentage. We've got sharp points. So this is where I wasn't too concerned about working on an animation layer for this particular case, and confusing the keyframes within here, because I can see all my keyframes separately within my graph editor anyway. So my path constraint, this is not what I want. And you can't just go to Bezier or any of these options. They don't work. You know, how do you solve this problem? You don't want this kind of jittery transition between these elements, right? And the way you fix that, it's not obvious, but if you go to the position in the motion controller and you go down within the menu here, you can see you've got the path constraint option here. Again, open that, and it's got percentage, and its default is linear float, right? So if you click on this option here, assign controller, you can see that you have options to change this to different things. And the one that you want is Bezier float. So you click on that, you can see that the camera's automatically changed. If you go to the curve editor, click on our percentage, and you can see that we've now got controllers, smooth controllers that we can change the animation for. And then we can actually, we don't actually care too much about what we did with those initial positions, because we can then change it all in here. So we can make the beginning really fast. And then it kind of ramps very slowly and controlled. Let's kind of smooth the motion out at the beginning. Okay, we have a quick question. Let's just get the mic, 1 second.
You said you could add your animation, your path.
You just talk into the mic a little bit.
Sorry. You said you could add your path constrained animation to another layer. That's been semi-holy grail for me. Would you just show that if it's very quick?
Okay. Okay, so let's actually do what I said you could do and put this animation of the camera path constraint on a different layer. So let's just go into our graph editor and let's do this again. So let's click on our percentage and let's select our keys and delete. So we've deleted that kind of path constraint. So we can see our keys here. Let's just open our animation layers layer thing. So it comes up with this new section here. And what we want to do is enable animation layers. Just click all. And then now let's create a new layer. Add animation layer. And now it's got rid of our keys from our first one, from anything that was on default. So we've got our base layer, which has all of our keys for our manual animation of our camera. Then we have our animation layer 1, which we can name, it's just exactly the same as the layers in here, but for animation. So now we can start to animate the target path again, or rather the position along the path. So we've got our camera selected, go to our motion control, position along the path. Let's activate our auto key. And we have no animation of along our path. So let's relink this guy because we've gone into a new animation layer. So let's relink him to our path. Not too sure why that unlinked, but we'll give it a go. So now he's back on our camera, on our path. Let's add a few keyframes for our percentages along the path, like we did last time. Again, I'm not going to be too careful with this. Let's make 40% there. That's going to be much faster. Let's make this 80%. And then let's just go into our curve editor and do it properly. Even though we've worked on a separate animation layer, in the graph editor you can still select and manipulate all of the different curves selected on that object. So it's not dependent on animation layers because everything is separate here anyway. So you can see again we've got our kind of like sharp angles. Go to our position. Position layer. Let's have a look. Path constraint. And make sure that this, when it is on Bezier float, let's just check that that's the right one. Position. Path constraint. Percentage. Go into our assign float controller, Bezier float. Now hopefully in our curve editor we have smooth lines, which we do. So we can start altering this again, as we did last time. So let's kind of ramp it fast at the beginning and slow at the end. Smooth this out. And then let's see what that is actually doing. Let's close. We can dock, obviously, our animation layers. Just have them in there and save them within your default UI. We always have this just saved within our UI because we use it quite a lot. And then let's go into our camera that we just worked in and have a little look at what that's done. So the position along that path is moving much quicker at the beginning. And then it's going to slow right down towards the end. So it's kind of not in an obvious place, that position controller, for the kind of animating the percentage along the path, and it's such an obvious thing to want to change. It's just it seems ridiculous of why it's in such a hidden place to actually make that into a kind of smooth motion. You know, all the way within this menu here, within motion controller, which not many people actually use anyway. So it seems completely pointless. The default for this should be Bezier float. I don't know why it's linear float, but it is. You just have to be aware of that because it can catch you out, and if you don't know about the motion controller, then you could be there for ages trying to figure out within the graph editor how to create this Bezier, which you would obviously think would be just easy to change here, but it's not. So that's a good one to note. Okay, let's look at some of the kind of specific scenes that we did for the previs. But while I'm doing that, I'll actually scrub along, and this is actually the full previs of the film, or one of the issues anyway that we created, and it'll kind of give you a great sense of the different scenes and how we kind of set it up. Jeff, do we have sound at all? Wanting to go louder. Oh, here we go. Yep. So this is previs with motion blur, and it works really well. I remember when we did this, I was like, that looks really good. We should do more of that. But yeah, I'll let it play, and I just wanted to kind of stop on that one because it was such a revelation for us. We're mixing that with actual footage, obviously, as well. And the same technique with this one, as I've just showed you. Linking the camera target, following it manually, adding and blending different controllers, different mocap data sets. Even playing with depth of field. Just giving you a sense of how to tell the story. Doing that all at the previous stage. So at the beginning of the film, our two characters have stolen a camera from a tourist, and the tourist is chasing after them. Here we see all of the market scenes. And a lot of this is remarkably similar to the final film. So this one setup scene with the market, we did lots of different camera moves in and around how they run past, following them, static cameras as they're kind of running past. So you're blending a running and a jumping motion. You can see where that transitions a little bit there, but it doesn't matter. It's doing exactly what we need it to. Using images and just really basic techniques, but it does exactly what you need it to.
Yeah, I say we build buckling on pallets.
And then combining that with kind of
That's very essential.
kind of dialogue tests and things like that.
We should build
I won't show the whole thing because this is the full film in Previs
Why would you
at this stage. But it's just good to see different scene setups, simple camera projection and backgrounds that are put in. Camera projection in the same way. So I can kind of scrub through this and we can see some of the different scenes that we set up. This is on the pier with a fish. As a fish jumps out of the water. So you can see that motion, that element here. Changed a little bit in the final film, that one. But then we get to the kind of transformation sequences. It'd be quite good to show some of these ones.
Transplanted heart. Guess how quick they had to part. The remembrance of today is the sad feeling.
So again, simple animated collages of the kind of beaches with the rubbish. Using Mass Effects to drop rubbish into the sea. These bits actually we didn't stay in the film. It was slightly too ambitious for our underwater shoot to incorporate a lot of these elements. We had this quite ambitious shot which we had no idea how to film. Fish turning into signs. It's going to be a bit tricky, that one.
Just concentrate, cause your heaven lives on. Retired slave men will look with the scorn, with a transplanted heart. Guess how quick they have to part. In remembrance of today, brings that feelings of tomorrow. Guess how quick they have to part. But leave me on.
It's funny to see those things once the film is completed and you can look back on things, but at the time they're a very serious, useful thing to have. Let's have a look at which ones we want to open here and just have a quick peek at some of the files. For those watching at home, the digital files that we're going to create will have all the films that we're showing today in full frame rate. So I know everyone's watching at home with on a much lower frame rate, so don't worry. The final files that you'll get will be good. So let's have a look at some of these scenes. I think I have a few missing elements. I think there's also a missing XREF. Let's see what we've got in here. Might have to open the other one. Let's have a look at what's in this scene. So you can see here we've kind of set up a kind of street scene with some very basic kind of texturing on the buildings, which is mainly supposed to work lower down. on shots like this, and we're not bothered about the rest of it. It's just to communicate the kind of place. Let's just delete some of these guys. Oops. Let's see what we've got here. We've got some missing displacement maps. We've got some displacement maps on our guys here, which is giving us a bit of a bulbous effect. So if we isolate our two main guys, let's just sort these guys out. Let's turn off this displacement we don't need. Just hide helpers for now. So you can see in this scene we've got our kind of bone guys, and we've got our kind of main tourist guy and two helpers kind of following him in a chase scene through these streets. These are all just linked with normal. If we go into our mixer mode, you can see that we've kind of blended and morphed several different clips together to do what we want for the motion. In the same way that I showed you a second ago. And we've got just one animation layer. So if we unhide all again, invert, hide our helpers. So we've got several cameras set up in this scene, doing lots of different things, and these were all kind of previewed out so that we could get the motions we want. So we have front on camera looking back at our tourist through our main characters here. We have one chasing with our tourist. So he's the tourist cam, POV. And then we've got a kind of side-on shot through the kind of market spaces on our characters, which is kind of similar to the shot that's kind of illustrated here. So you can see this is that actual shot with the market kind of placed in there as an XREF. And then this was the final shot with the characters running past the camera in the market in Zanzibar. So again, very simply set up. Really basic mapping on the objects, just UV mapping to make it work on the faces we need to. And these would be set up within the day, these scenes. So let's take a look. Let's save it actually. So you've got the smash boat scene. That's quite an interesting one. Again, we wanted to kind of communicate as much as we could on the underwater and the fish for whoever was going to do that element, which at the time was kind of going to be us, which we were slightly panicking about. Okay, what have we got here? See here we have our fish. And then if we go up, our boat somewhere. See our boat there. Zoom out. So we can see that we've kind of like fractured our boat, pre-fractured our boat, and then we've got this ball here is colliding with the boat. And then obviously we hide that ball when we're kind of prevising. So we simplify the simulation, and then our fish kind of smashes up, and our character kind of falls off. So we've got a few things going on here with different constraints and rigs. This is one of the more complex setups. Go into our mixer, see what we've got. Again, just two. I've actually a javelin throw mocap data mixed with an accidentally fall data, and then we've just kind of custom animated on different layers. Which we can kind of scroll up and down through within our controller here. So we can see what keyframes are on what in our biped here. And again, it kind of works well, this javelin throw. It works exactly for what we need it to do, as he's kind of static. And I think what we did was took away the movement of the legs from the javelin throw. So we just got the upper body movement from it. So we get the upper body movement of the arm as he's preparing for the shot, and we're mixing that with the fall, and that gives us our effect for the previs on this shot here. And then again, we've got several cameras in our scene for different options. Let's have a look at another one. This is our hero cam. This is the one from above, I think. Oh, no, this is not the one. There should be one hero one from above. Let's have a look if we can find that one, or if that was in a different scene. No, this was set up just for the passing scene as it goes through the camera, and this is the one we actually used in the end. The kind of tight-in shot of him. And that turned to be the most accurate because we couldn't get the water in this shot in the final film anyway, because our actor couldn't go on the water. So this was filmed in the dugout trench on the beach. So this was a fun one. Again, really simply set up, but with a few extra details with the Vray 5 fracture and the simulation, which again is something we're going to touch upon later on anyway. So what else have we got? We've got the walk along the beach scenes, and again this was the same process as before, camera projecting, or rather just simply texturing the kind of background and the base. I'm not sure I've actually opened this one before. Let's see what this is doing. It's a problem when you have everything linked. You miss a few things. I'm not sure who likes this one. The market one is the one I kind of relinked, so yeah, that was the main reference, and then the boat one. So there were two examples of a kind of the market on the town, and then the fish underwater. And that's more or less the extent that we went to with the previs, and that's kind of like all really I have to show you. We showed you how to set up the motion controller, introducing to the actual motion panel, and then setting up mocap data, creating animation layers, and working with the camera. So were there any questions before I move on to the tracking section of this morning on the kind of previs or anything I've covered so far?
The effects that you had in the previs shots that were working really well with, like the motion blur and the depth of field, are you baking that stuff in, or are you actually doing a couple channels just to throw that in post?
Yeah, the motion blur stuff was literally just real smart motion blur on top of the previs file. The depth of field, I'm not actually too sure, actually. I can't actually remember how we did the depth of field. I think there's a few plugins that you can use which export the like masks really quickly. I think we either rendered out the mask really quickly, or we used one of the plugins to render out a mask just to create the depth of field, basically. We might have even rendered it out, but then used the previs just really quickly. Because you can generate a Z depth with no lighting, so I think we probably just rendered out the scene with no lights, like really quickly with a Z depth pass, and then use that with the previs basically.
So you're just letting real smoke RSMB crunch it. You're not actually using velocity passes or anything like that.
Not for stages like this, no. We only really use the velocity passes if we've got a considerable amount of motion and we want to link that to the real smart motion blur, basically. But more often than not, we will either bake in the motion blur if we really feel like we need to, or we will just get away with using the real smart motion blur, basically. We found limited success with the velocity passes with the way we've used them before, basically. This is more a compositing thing that we'll talk about on the third day, but in terms of the previs, yeah, we would have most likely rendered out with no lights the Z depth. Were there any other thoughts or questions on what we've covered so far on the previs?
Sorry, I'll throw out another one. With the animation layers on the bipeds, when you're setting up different layers, are you using those, like, if you want to control the face separately from arms, are you using different layers, or is it, like, how do you break up your layer structure for layers on bipeds? Is there any methodology to that?
If we just open up Max again, because it seems to have died a little bit. Let's go back into our motion thing here. There's no general rule really, because we don't go into like loads of detail with this. You can be super specific. I guess it's just an organizational thing. It's a preference thing. If you want to, call this head, and then work on the head separately, and then in a different layer, create a new layer and call this arms. And then you're working on all the different. At least then you're working on the head or the arms. You can do that quite easily. For the sake of because we were changing small things on the bipeds for the sake of our previs here. We were only changing positions of the body or the head, and it was a very few keyframes really. So there was, if we were changing a lot, then we probably would want to be more specific and organized with our layering system and naming things properly. But often or not, we just have layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, and it's probably not the proper workflow, because I guess one guy would be working on one previs shot, for example, and if multiple people were working on the same files, and we probably would be more organized with naming all the layer sets and doing everything properly, basically, yeah. But because of the speed we were churning out this like hundreds of shots for the previs in such a short period of time, I think we probably were a bit lazy with how we were organizing the file, yeah. But yeah, you can do that very easily. Just go to the original layer here. You can see what position he's in the original layer. After layer 1, we're doing something else, and then after layer 2, we might be moving something else. So yeah, it is good practice to be more organized with naming the layer sets and working on different parts of the body on different layers, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, because you could just call this, it might not be specific to an object or part of the body. It might be specific to a type of movement, like moves left more, and then you're moving a lot of different elements of the body. So you're categorizing it slightly differently. He might be like moving his entire leg in one direction, which needs his waist to twist as well. So you wouldn't necessarily group this by object or by parts of the body. You might group it by the type of movement that you're changing. Let's close him down. Let's save him.
I saw in the preview that you have the palms animated. So could you explain how you animated the trees and the palms in the preview?
Animated the what, sorry?
The palms, the trees.
The trees. I didn't do that file, so I can't say I know, to be honest. But I think it was Xfrog or one of the other ones that animates trees really easily. It might even be one of the default ones in Max for all I know, but sorry, I can't answer that question properly because I didn't do that. I didn't do that scene. But I've got a feeling it was a default Max thing. I don't think it's anything we did, anything with any specifics, any specific plugins or anything like that. I think it's a default Max setup.